Hello and welcome back to my channel. Thanks for popping in. If you're new here, please like and subscribe for me. If you find this content helpful, hit that notification bell so that you don't miss out on the next video. Comment below with your thoughts or topics you'd like me to cover, and check out my website, consultingninja.tech. With that out of the way, let's get right to it. I've been doing a mini-series on authentication, and I want to make sure that I don't leave out my React and Express folks. So I'm going to show how to use Google Authentication when you are using React and Express. I will leave links in the description of this video for the basics of setting up a Express backend as well as a Vite React front end. I'll also leave a timestamp if you want to skip the Google Developer Console setup and just get to the coding portion. What we are going to make is this. It is a sign in button that you can click and it will take your users to a Google page. If they're already signed into their Google account, they can just select it. Otherwise, they would enter their username and password. And then when you click that button, it will redirect back to another route. We'll take that request from Google and authenticate them using the google-auth-library NPM package. And then as a bonus, I'm also going to show how to ping the info API in order to get the name and family name as well as the picture for that user. If you want to see how to do this, stick around. That's what we're going to do right now. The very first thing that you need to do is set up your Google Developer Console. You can just go to Google search and type in Google Developer Console and then click the first link that comes up. It should be the console.developers.google.com. You do have to have a project in order to do this, so if you don't have one, click Create Project. All you really need here is a name. You don't have to choose a location, and the name is only important for you. If you've already created a project, you need to go into the Actions menu and click Settings. Once you're inside of your project, you'll be presented with a dashboard. You need to go to the Navigation menu all the way in the top left-hand corner and select APIs and Services, and then go to OAuth Consent Screen. You can only have one consent screen per project, and I already have one since I've been showing how to do this with other stacks, so I'll just go through and edit this one. You do have to choose a name for the consent screen. This is what's going to be presented to the users, as well as a user support email. If you want to give a logo, you can. It's not required, but it does make it look better. The app domain information is not required here, but authorized domains is. You can just put localhost.com. If you move to production, then you would want to put whatever your domain is .com. The last required piece of information on this step is the developer contact information, and you can use the same email address as the support email. The next step, and this is the really important one, is defining scopes for your consent screen. The scopes are what you're telling your user you're going to do once they give you access. In order to authenticate using Google, you have to have the basic three. This will be empty by default, so you can just click Add or Remove Scopes and select the first three options: userinfo.email, userinfo.profile, as well as OpenID. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you're using the OAuth2 client, you have to list out the scopes one after another in an object that you pass in. That is in the form of a URL, where all of them start with a base URL of https www.googleapis.com, and then this picks up from there. So you can come back to this screen when you're setting up your scopes in your backend and just copy and paste any ones out that you need. For the sake of our video, again, we're just authenticating, so we're going to use these three. When your scopes are defined, click Save and Continue. When you first set this up, your project will be in test mode, and while you're testing, the only people that the consent screen will work for are users that you have listed as test users. So you need to make sure that you have whoever you're going to be testing this with listed here in the test users list. Once you have all that done, just make sure that everything is correct and click Save. So with your consent screen done, you need to set up credentials. So go to the Credentials tab and click Create Credentials. These are going to be OAuth Client ID credentials, and we're going to have an application type of web application. The name here doesn't matter. This is just going to be for your reference. It'll show up in the list of all your credentials. The part that is important are these two pieces. The authorized JavaScript origins are where you're going to be pinging this from, so basically where the request is coming from. And the redirect URIs is where the requests are going out to. And you can have multiple set up for both of these. You can have multiple places that the origin comes from, and you can have multiple places that the redirect goes to. For the sake of this example, we're going to be coming from http://localhost 5173. That's our Vite front end. And then we're going to be going to http://127.0.0.1 port 3000/OAuth. So be sure to give that a save. I'm going to be using credentials I already created because the note here on the bottom says this can take 5 minutes to a few hours, and we don't have that long. Once you click create though, it's going to present you with this screen that just says, hey, we created your client. And the two pieces of information that you're going to need from here in order to make this work are the ID and the secret. So inside of your Express backend, you have to make sure to have .env installed because you're going to need environment variables. So be sure to do an npm install .env. You're also going to need to install the google-auth-library. So do an npm install google-auth-library. google-auth-library is the official auth library from Google, so no worries there. Inside of your code, make sure that you have .env installed and make sure you have the google-auth-library installed. Create a new environment variable, and then I like to make sure that these match, so I would just do client_ID equals, and then you can copy and paste those out of your console. So paste that in, and then you need the client secret, client_secret. And you can copy that as well. So that's the last thing that you need to do in your Google Developer Console. The rest is going to happen in the Express and the React portion. So we can save this environment variable. We're not going to use any views, so we can delete that whole directory. Inside of routes, let's go ahead and just repurpose these. We can rename this one to request. This is the route that's going to generate an auth URL using the auth client. The auth URL is how you ping Google to generate that request and then the redirect. So we need to have express in router. We also need to fire up .env const .env equals require .env, and then do the .env.config. We also need to fire up the OAuth2 client, so const brackets OAuth2 client, and that should be a capital C. And we're going to require the google-auth-library package. This is going to be a post request, so router.post, and it's going to be an async function, so we need to put an async in front of there, and then we can get rid of this. And what we're going to do here is when we ping this route from our front end, we're going to generate a URL and then send that back and ping the URL from our front end. And we want to do that because if you redirect from one origin to another, instead of getting credentials and a code back, Google will package this up in a cross-site request forgery token that requires a whole bunch more steps and a whole nother package in order to make use of. So trust me, save yourself the headache and do it this way. So what we need to do here is let's do a response.header. We need to make sure to deal with cores, so access control allow origin. This will be our front end localhost 5173. So we make sure we're not blocked by cores. And then Google also prefers you to have this header on there, so add another header, and this is the referrer policy. And what we want to do here is no referrer when downgrade. And that's because we're testing and we're not using HTTPS, we're only using HTTP. So if you're using HTTP with GoogleAuth, you have to have that header on there. Now we need a redirect URL. This is telling the OAuth2 client where we're planning to redirect to. So const redirect URL, and that's going to be http://127.0.0.1 port 3000/OAuth. This has to match because when you send the request to Google, Google's going to check to make sure that you have that redirect URI listed as we had set up just a minute ago. If it's not listed, you'll just get an error. So be sure that this is matching what you set in your console. Now we're firing up the actual OAuth2 client. So const OAuth2 client equals new OAuth2 client, and we're going to pass in the process.env .client_ID and process.env.client_secret. So first the ID, then the secret, and then the redirect URL. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the OAuth2 client to generate the URL that we're going to use to ping Google with. So const authorize URL equals OAuth2 client dot generate auth URL, and this takes an object. We have to have an access type, and for the sake of testing, put offline. This is going to force a refresh token to be created. I recommend putting this on there for testing because this will make sure that a refresh token is always sent. So if you're seeing this multiple times, then it will look the same every time. In production, you would only have the access type of offline if you're needing to force a refresh token to be created. For scope, what we're going to have here is that giant URL I was talking about, https://www.googleapis.com/auth, and then we need the userinfo.profile, and then also the open ID. So if you needed other scopes for your application, you would just, as I said, go to the Google Developer Console and copy and paste the other ones after this. Lastly, we're going to put a prompt on here of consent just to make sure that the consent screen stays open and they have to verify in the affirmative even if they're signed in. We don't want this to just get pushed through. And then response.json, and we're going to send an object of URL and authorize URL. So now we have a route set up that we can ping to generate an authorization URL, and we can ping that from our front end. Before we create the front end code, let's go ahead and set up the route for authenticating that request that comes back from Google. So let's repurpose this index.js file, and we'll rename that to OAuth. And inside of here, what we're going to need to do is we'll need all of the same stuff that we needed before, so we can copy and paste all of this out. So we need express, router, .env, and the OAuth2 client. I want to show you guys how to get the user information, but I want to point out here quickly before I do that, that according to Google, you should not associate an email as being a person. For the sake of Google, as far as Google is concerned, the person itself is the access token that comes back. So you can use that access token to find out their name, their email address, and such, but it is not, don't save that email address or their personal information as them, because that information can change according to Google. So just a note there. But let's define an async function here and call this get user data. This is going to take an access underscore token. And what we're going to do here is do a const response equals await fetch. If you're not using Node 17.5 or sooner, you'd have to do the old school version, or just upgrade to Node 17.5 or later in order to be able to access fetch. And what we're going to do here is use a string literal, so use the backticks, and it's going to be https://www googleapis.com/OAuth2/userinfo question mark, and then we're going to add access token, access underscore token, and then $ bracket access underscore token. Then what we'll do is we'll do a const data equals await response.json, and you can console.log this out if you want. Data equals data. And you also could console.log out the response if you want to see the full response. The redirect that comes back from Google, it will be a GET, so we can leave that as is, but we do need to make it async. So add async there and get rid of this response.render. We're not rendering out anything. What we are going to have is a code that we're going to pull out of the params. So const code equals request.query.code. And you can console.log that if you want to see it. It's just a code that Google is sending back. And again, if you do this and the code's not there, be sure that you are initiating this as I'm setting it up, because again, if you're not setting it up this way, you'll probably get that cross-site request forgery token instead, and trust me, you don't want to have to deal with that. You have to get a special public key, and Google rotates them. Just trust me when I say don't waste your time with that. It's a lot extra work when you don't need to do it. So const redirect URL, this is going to be that same URL. This has to match what we sent originally, so http://127.0.0.1 port 3000/OAuth. We also can fire up our client, so we can copy and paste that. Could have just copied and pasted both, I suppose. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a const response equals await OAuth2client.getToken, passing in that code that was sent back. And trust me when I say this as well, ignore this, they're full of crap. I don't know why the IDE is saying that this has no effect, because if you hover on here, you can see that this is in fact promise-based. If you don't put the await on there, nothing else will work, because it's not going to wait for that to come back. So be sure you have the await. Don't listen to your IDE. It's full of crap. All right, now what we need to do is await and ignore this one again. OAuth2client.setCredentials, and it's going to be response.tokens. Now give yourself some sort of message here. You can say tokens acquired, and then you can set your user. And that's going to be the OAuth2client.credentials. You can console.log those if you'd like. Credentials. And you can just pass in user. And then lastly, let's do an await, and we'll use that function that we just wrote, get user data, and pass in the user.access token. And then lastly, we have to have a catch. So catch errors, and you can do a console.log error with signing in with Google. Give that a save. Now make sure in your bin www towards the bottom you have the port number set up correctly, And I always like to add a console.log in this onListening function so that you know the server is running. Server is running on port, and then I add the port in there. And in your app.js, you need to make sure that those two routes are defined correctly. So we have our auth router, which is the routes/OAuth, and the request route, which is generating the URL for us. That is the request router routes/request. Then make sure that you plug those routes in. So with that, you can fire up your Node.js backend with npm start. Now we need to focus our attention on the React portion. So inside of this same directory, I have my Vite React front end, and inside of there, all we're going to do is go into our source and go into the app.jsx, and we can delete all of this out except for the alligator brackets. We're not going to use the logo. I'll be sure to include the Google sign-in buttons in the repository. The link will be in the description. And there'll also be a link for the requirements you have to follow when you're using these. So be sure you follow those requirements. We're not going to need the count or set count, and we're not going to need the set state. But we will need to import Google button. And this is going to be from /assets, Google sign-in buttons, web, 1x, btn, _Google, _sign-in, _dark, _pressed, _web.png. I think that they gave that a long enough name. All right, now we're going to define a navigate function. So function navigate, that's going to take a URL, and then we're going to do a window.location.href to that URL. Now we need an async function, and call this auth. This is not going to take any parameters, but we're going to do a const response equals await fetch, and you guessed it, we're going to ping our own backend 127.0.0.1 port 3000/request. This is going to generate that auth URL so that we can ping Google, and we just need to pass in an object with the method of post. Now we can pull out our data. If data equals await response.json, you can console.log that if you'd like here, and then we just need to fire that navigate function, passing in data.url. So now we have our functionality done. All we need to do now is render out a button. So inside of our alligator teeth, I have to, of course, be sure to say, welcome to Consulting Ninja. I might as well add our H3 and say google-auth. I will leave out the link, and we'll just get to the rest. For the sake of time, I'm just going to render out a button. This will be a type of button. On click, we're going to run an anonymous function that runs our auth function. Then inside of here, we just render our image with the source equal to the Google button and an alt of Google sign-in, and give that a save. Fire up your React front end by typing the npm run dev. With our front end running and our server up and running, now we can click our sign in with Google button, we get that authorization URL that we've packaged together with our request route and send that back to our front. We then navigate to that using the function that we wrote, the window.location.href, and that will actually send the request to Google and generate this page. I'm already signed into my Google account, so I can just select it, and then this will send the request, that redirect URI, back to our OAuth route, where we pull that access and refresh token out. It also comes with a list of the scopes that we said we were going to use. The ID token is just a JWT token. This is not the actual ID. If you were to pull this apart, it would be a whole bunch of information that you're never going to use, or very likely to never use. And then here we have the response from the userinfo, that profile request that we sent using that access token. There is my name, my given name, and my family name, as well as my picture. So there we have it. There is Google authentication, this time using React and Express. I hope that you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe. Take care, and as always, have a great day.